The film opens mid-flight, a journey from Los Angeles to Paris. The cabin is alive with chatter as a few flight attendants excitedly discuss their plans for when they finally land in Paris. The anticipation is palpable, their voices filled with the thrill of a well-deserved break. But amidst the usual calm of the flight, co-pilot Rendy's curiosity is piqued. He can't shake the oddity of the cargo they're carrying, a large, heavily guarded shipment watched over by a man dressed in full protective gear and armed with a weapon. Rendy, unable to ignore the mystery, turns to the pilot, Ray, and asks about the strange cargo. Ray, his face unreadable, admits he doesn't know much more than Randy does. He explains that the cargo is shrouded in secrecy, but if anything goes wrong, they're supposed to contact Dr. Bennett and Dr. Sebastian, two first-class passengers aboard the flight. In the end, Rai reassures Rennie, urging him not to worry about the cargo and to focus on their primary responsibility, flying the plane. As the conversation wraps up, a flight attendant named Megan enters the cockpit, holding a tray of coffee for the two men. She casually asks Ray if it's true that he's planning to retire after this flight. Ray, with a knowing smile, confirms that this will be his final journey as a pilot. He's ready to retire and spend his later years with his family. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, a mix of unusual passengers adds to the tension of the flight. Among them is Officer Truman, a no-nonsense cop, escorting a prisoner. Frank, whose cold, detached demeanor only adds to the unease. The young couple, Peter and Kara, sit nervously, exchanging quiet words, while Tony and Dabby, seemingly out of place, try to keep to themselves. At the front of the plane, the professional golfer, Billy Freeman, traveling with his wife Anna, relaxes, though the strain of the flight seems to have caught up with him. In business class, the atmosphere is more intense. Dr. Bennett to Sebastian and Dr. Lucas, all first-class passengers, are deep in conversation, though it's less of a discussion and more of a heated debate about the mysterious cargo they're transporting. The tension is palpable as the doctors argue over what to do with the strange shipment, its contents still unknown to most of the passengers. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Ray notices a storm brewing in the distance. His voice comes over the intercom, calm but firm, as he reassures the passengers that they should remain calm, though the upcoming turbulence might be severe. The plane begins to shake violently as the storm hits, the turbulence making it harder for the passengers to stay seated. Suddenly, the chaos intensifies. One of the cargo items breaks free, slamming down onto the guard's leg with brutal force. His scream cuts through the turbulence as the impact causes severe injuries. At the Pentagon in Los Angeles, urgency fills the air. A scientist and a military leader are frantically urging a presidential aide to immediately brief the president about the escape of four scientists, including Dr. Bennett and his colleagues. The tension is palpable as they explain that these scientists are believed to be carrying a biological experiment, a virus that could spell disaster if it falls into the wrong hands. The notes they've uncovered reveal the horrifying truth. Dr. Bennett was conducting secretive, dangerous experiments on a virus with the terrifying ability to reanimate the dead. While the experiment could potentially change the course of science, a failure could unleash something far worse, an uncontrollable outbreak. If the virus spreads, countless lives would be at risk, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, aboard the flight, the situation takes a darker turn. Amid the cave, a woman emerges from the cargo hold, her sudden appearance shocking everyone. It's Dr. Kelly, the wife of Dr. Lucas, whose earlier concern about the cargo had raised questions. Now it's clear why he had been so agitated, even arguing with Dr. Bennett and Dr. Sebastian. Darky's condition is grave. She stumbles forward, visibly ill as she collapses, her severe health issues suggesting she's been infected or worse, as Dr. Kelly tried to make her way out of the cargo hold. The guard, startled by her appearance, immediately opened fire. His aim was off, though, and the bullet missed its mark, instead striking the plane's communication system. Dr. Kelly, panicked and desperate, raised her hands in a gesture of peace, trying to explain that she was just a doctor and was also suffering from an illness. Her voice trembled, but before she could say more, the guard barked an order for her to leave. But as she turned to comply, something chilling and inexplicable happened. Without warning, the guard fired again, this time hitting Dr. Kelly. She collapsed lifeless. But then something even more terrifying occurred. As the guard reloaded his weapon, preparing to deal with any further threats, Dr. Kelly's body stirred. In a grotesque twist, she rose from the floor, her eyes vacant and wild. The transformation was swift. She had become one of the undead. In a flash, she lunged at the guard, her newfound zombie strength overpowering him as she tore into him. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, tension was building. Peter and Tony, already in relationships, couldn't help but eye one of the flight attendants, Stacy, their glances lingering far too long. Later in the back of the plane, Tony quietly tried to flirt with Kara, his intentions clear, but his actions only sparked an argument between the two couples. Shortly after, the plane suddenly plunged into another round of violent turbulence. The force of it is so intense that several passengers were thrown from their seats, injured by the jarring impact. Among them was Truman, who had been knocked unconscious after hitting his head on the cabin ceiling. When he came to, a chilling realization struck him. His prisoner, Frank, was missing. Panic set in as he scrambled to search for him, questioning the passengers one by one. No one seemed to know where Frank was, but Frank wasn't far. He had slipped into the plane's kitchen at the very back, hidden from view as chaos unfolded around him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the plane, Ray turned to Randy, his tone urgent. He needed Randy to meet with Dr. Bennett and Dr. Sebastian to get their help with repairing the damaged communication equipment in the cargo area. Time was running out, and they needed to restore communication before it was too late. After meeting with Dr. Bennett, Rennie learned that Dr. Sebastian and Dr. Lucas would accompany him to the cargo area. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Bennett leaned in and gave a quiet but serious instruction. He told Dr. Sebastian to keep a close watch on Dr. Lucas. There were suspicions that Lucas might do anything to get to his wife, Dr. Kelly, who was now gravely ill. If things escalated, Dr. Bennett made it clear. Dr. Sebastian was to eliminate Dr. Lucas first, no questions asked. Randy and the others wasted no time, rushing into the cargo room, only to realize something was horribly wrong. The guard was gone, and Dr. Kelly was no longer there. As they cautiously searched, the horror of the situation became clear. Dr. Kelly and the guard had both transformed into zombies. Without warning, they attacked Dr. Sebastian and Dukas, their grotesque forms moving with unnerving speed. Despite their attempts to fight back, Dr. Sebastian and Dr. Lucas were overwhelmed, unable to escape the deadly assault. Terrified, Randy quickly sprinted back to the cockpit, his mind racing with fear. He rushed to inform Ray that the cargo they were carrying had contained zombies. The creatures had attacked, and both Dr. Sebastian and Dr. Lucas was dead. Ray, trying to maintain control, dismissed Randy's claim, suggesting he had to be mistaken. Zombies were nothing more than a fantasy, but Randy was adamant. His fear was undeniable as he insisted that the threat was real and that they needed to land the plane before the zombies could spread. However, the storm outside was worsening, making a landing impossible. Ray, knowing time was running out, instructed Randy to find Paul, a police officer secretly hired for security who could help them navigate the growing crisis on board. At first, Paul couldn't believe what Randy was saying. To him, zombies sounded like something straight out of a horror movie, not reality. But despite his skepticism, Paul's sense of duty kicked in. He couldn't afford to dismiss the warning. He decided to take action, intending to speak with Dr. Bennett, the man responsible for the mysterious cargo. When Paul approached Dr. Bennett, he wasted no time asking about the contents of the cargo. But Dr. Bennett's response was evasive. His eyes flickered with something unreadable as he claimed the cargo contained fragile historical artifacts, nothing more than valuable but harmless relics that shouldn't be opened by unauthorized personnel. His tone was calm, but Paul could sense something wasn't right. The doctor was hiding something, and it was clear he wasn't being truthful. Meanwhile, back at the Flight Communications Center in Los Angeles, the situation was escalating. The Department of Homeland Security called in with urgent instructions. They ordered Ray's plane to return to Los Angeles immediately. But when the officer at the communications center checked, he found that contact with the plane had been lost several minutes earlier. Back on the plane, Truman was deep in his search for Frank, his mind racing with the possibility that the prisoner was hiding somewhere on board. As he moved through the narrow aisles, he crossed paths with Paul, who suggested they head to the cargo area. Frank might be hiding there, and Paul was determined to help search. Armed and ready, they descended to the Y cargo hold. They carefully checked the space, weapons raised, but strangely there was nothing. No sign of Frank and no zombies, despite what Randy had described earlier. The silence was unsettling, but they pressed on. That's when Paul noticed the open ventilation shaft. Without hesitation, he moved toward it, determined to investigate further. Suddenly, a figure lunged from the shadows, a zombie, hungry and vicious. Paul's reflexes kicked in, and he shot it point blank, the gunshot ringing out in the confined space. The sound of gunfire echoed through the cargo area, and chaos erupted. At that very moment, Truman, still searching, was attacked by another zombie. In the frenzy, his pistol discharged, the bullet flying into the air and striking a flight attendant. In the main cabin, Emily, trying to maintain some semblance of order, worked to keep the other passengers calm amidst the growing panic. She attempted to contact Ray, but before she could make the call, disaster struck. At the same time, D. Kelly, who had somehow managed to escape through the ventilation shaft, suddenly attacked. The sound of Emily's screams pierced through the chaos, instantly snapping Randy into action. He fired quickly, unloading his weapon into the ventilation shaft to prevent the zombies from reaching the cabin and attacking the passengers. But the threat was far from over. The zombies began emerging from behind the toilet glass, their grotesque forms lurching toward Carrara, who was trapped inside. The cabin erupted into chaos. Peter and Tony, desperate to save Carob, rushed to her, aid only to be attacked by zombies themselves. The violence spread like wildfire with the air thick with terror. Saint, attempting to help, was bitten by one of the monsters. The scene escalated into a frenzy, the panic palpable as more and more passengers were dragged into the nightmare. Meanwhile, Megan, another flight attendant, frantically reported the situation to Ray. Her voice was shaken but clear. She described the attackers as the same kind of zombies Randy had warned them about earlier. Ray's face hardened as he absorbed the grim news. Without hesitation, he ordered Megan to calm the passengers, his mind already racing through emergency procedures. He was preparing for an emergency landing. While Randy worked to secure the ventilation, the chaos inside the plane reached a new level. Emily, now fully transformed into a zombie, lunged at him. She bit down hard, sinking her teeth into his flesh. Pain and terror surged through Rennie as he fought to free himself. But the damage was done. He was severely injured. In the midst of the case, Dr. Bennett, terrified and desperate, pleaded with Ray to open the cockpit door. His fear of the outbreak was consuming him. He had to hide away from the growing wave of zombies. He didn't want to face the same fate. Suddenly, the plane was thrown into violent turbulence. The aircraft lurched, sending several passengers crashing to the ground. In the disorienting chaos, the zombies managed to break through the cabin floor. Within moments, one of the passengers became an easy meal. Their screams were swallowed by the madness. As the panic spread, Megan tried to escape the chaos, but she was confronted by Stacy, now fully infected, her eyes hollow with the hunger of the undead. Before Megan could react, Frank appeared just in time to save her. He shoved her away from Stacy, urging her to run. His tone was urgent, filled with the grim reality of the situation. It was clear that there was no time to waste. The entire economy class had succumbed to the zombie outbreak. In the front cabin, chaos erupted as a nun tried to save a passenger, desperately pulling them away from the zombies closing in. But the undead were too fast. In a horrifying moment, the nun was dragged into the throng. Her leg was violently ripped off as the zombies devoured her. The screams of those trapped in the cabin echoed in the chaos, but there was no escape. Meanwhile, far from the wreckage, military leader August received critical news from the Air Force Base. They had pinpointed the location of the plane carrying Dr. Bennett. With no way to establish contact with the pilot, and the situation was worsening by the second, August made the hard decision. The plane had to be destroyed, survivors or not. The outbreak on board was a ticking time bomb, and they couldn't afford the risk of it spreading. However, Vice President York hesitated, his moral compass pulling him in the opposite direction. He couldn't simply order the death of innocent lives, even if they were aboard a doomed flight. But the pressure mounted. Jan Sen, the scientific representative, argued coldly but rationally. If they didn't act swiftly, the virus would spread beyond the plane, and the consequences could be catastrophic. The death toll would rise exponentially. Reluctantly, York bowed to the greater threat, giving August the go-ahead to initiate the strike. Without wasting a moment, August contacted the Air Force, his orders clear. Destroy the plane carrying Dr. Bennett and whatever survivors remained. On the plane, Billy and several other business class passengers were oblivious to the disaster unfolding in economy class. The outbreak had spread, and no one realized the danger until zombie Emily appeared in front of them. Instinctively, Billy grabbed the nearest object, a golf club, and struck her with precision, showcasing his pro-level swing. But as he looked at her, confusion and concern swept over him. Questioning if he hurt someone. The answer came in an instant. Emily wasn't human anymore. With the horrifying realization dawning on him, Billy quickly turned his focus to survival. He wielded his golf club with deadly intent, knocking down zombies that tried to attack. Billy's fight for survival was interrupted when he encountered Truman and Paul, who were desperately trying to fend off the zombies. They asked for his help, knowing that his weapon could make the difference. But Billy Torn couldn't leave his wife behind in business class. She was still unprotected. He couldn't risk it. Dr. Bennett, ever the strategist, suggested they head to the ventilation room. He believed it would be the safest place to hide from the relentless zombies. The group moved toward the back of the plane, but just as they reached the rear, the plane was hit with another round of violent turbulence. In the chaos, one of the passengers was sent crashing into the economy class cabin, where the waiting zombies quickly overwhelmed him. Meanwhile, Rendy, having been knocked out earlier, regained consciousness in the cockpit. Struggling to get his bearings, he asked Rye to open the cockpit door. When Rye complied, hoping to get some clarity on the situation, Rennie's eyes were vacant and his movements were jerky. In an instant, he lunged at Rye, biting him in the neck. The transformation was complete. Rendy was a zombie. With Rendy now fully turned, the plane's controls were thrown into chaos. The autopilot kicked in, but the plane shook violently as the crew scrambled to regain control. Dr. Bennett was thrown across the cabin, landing in the cargo area, now a horrific nest of zombies. Trapped, he was overwhelmed and devoured by the very creatures he had helped unleash. As Truman and Paul fought desperately against the relentless tide of zombies, it became painfully clear that there were just too many to fight off. The undead poured in from every direction, pushing the two men to their limits. When they met Frank and Megan, they quickly joined forces, barricading the door with whatever they could find. But despite their best efforts, the makeshift barricade was no match for the sheer strength of the zombies. With ammunition running low and the situation growing more dire, Truman shouted at Megan, urging her to contact Ray. They needed the pilot to bring the plane down. But when Megan tried to make the call, there was no answer. The silence that followed was deafening. It was then that they realized the horrifying truth. Rye had already been consumed by Rendy, who had turned into a zombie. There would be no help coming from the cockpit, just as despair started to take hold. A sound came from the ventilation shaft, soft at first but unmistakable. It was Billy and Anna. They had somehow survived the case and the zombie attacks. With a mix of relief and urgency, they gathered with the others to discuss their next move. It was clear now they were the only 6 left uninfected by the virus. The group's plan was clear. They needed to get to the cockpit and try to land the plane. But standing in their way was the cabin, now swarming with zombies, and the path ahead was anything but safe. Truman knew they couldn't simply charge through the chaos. The first step was to retrieve the guard's weapon. He had spotted it earlier when he and Paul were in the cargo room. But the cargo room was no longer a safe space. It was now a zombie-infested nightmare. Determined, Truman shifted tactics. He began collecting chemicals from the cargo room, piecing together a makeshift plan. He could use them to create an explosion, a last-ditch effort to clear the path and take down the zombies that stood between them in the cockpit. After gathering the volatile ingredients, he moved toward the cargo area to retrieve the guard's weapon. As Truman fumbled for the weapon and ammunition, disaster struck. The explosion had done its damage, but a few zombies, somehow still alive, staggered toward him. They moved with predatory purpose, and Truman found himself surrounded. The smell of burning flesh and the growl of the undead filled the air as the situation turned critical. But Truman, refusing to succumb to fear, fought his way through the horde. With a final desperate burst of energy, he managed to break free from the cargo room, clutching an SMG and a stash of ammunition. As the tension in the cabin grew, a jet appeared on the radar, its ominous silhouette cutting through the sky. Truman's eyes widened when he saw it, a clear sign that their time was running out. He immediately warned the group that the jet wasn't coming to rescue them. It was preparing to attack. Panic surged through him, but his voice remained steady. If they could somehow let the pilot of the jet know they were still alive, they might avoid being destroyed. But to do that, they had to get to the cockpit and use the communication system, and they needed to move quickly. Without wasting another second, they charged into the cabin, weapons raised, ready to fight their way through the sea of zombies. But the sheer number of undead attacking from every angle made it nearly impossible to move forward. The chaos was overwhelming. In the madness, Billy and Anna were both bitten. Yet another blow to their dwindling hope. With time slipping away, Billy, bloodied and desperate, urged Truman and the others to keep pushing toward the cockpit. He and Anna would try to lead the zombies away, buying them precious moments to escape. Despite their injuries, they moved toward the front of the plane, drawing the zombies away from the others. But it wasn't enough. As they were surrounded by the relentless horde, Billy made a gut-wrenching decision. In a final desperate attempt to help, he ripped open the plane's door. The sudden pressure change sent the zombies flying out of the plane, sucked into the deadly slipstream. During the chaos, Truman and the others rushed into the cockpit, hearts pounding, hoping to prevent the impending attack. Frank immediately scrambled to the communication system, attempting to reach the jet pilot in a desperate bid to stop the assault. But their hopes were dashed when they realized the communication system had been damaged during the chaos. There was no way to contact the pilot, and the clock was ticking. The jet closed in, its weapons ready. Truman and Frank fought to steer the plane, desperately trying to dodge the missile now locked onto their path. But it was too late. The missile slammed into the center of the plane with a deafening explosion, tearing through the fuselage. Just when things seemed like they couldn't get worse, an unexpected twist occurred. One of the zombies, sucked out of the plane earlier, collided with the jet's pilot, sending the jet into a deadly spiral. In an instant, the jet exploded, its fiery wreckage tumbling from the sky. Amid the wreckage and confusion, Truman and Frank fought to maintain control of the plane. Despite the damage and chaos, they managed to land it safely, their bodies bruised but alive. In the aftermath, Truman, Megan, Paul, and Frank set out on foot, hoping to reach the nearest town. Their bodies, fatigued and starving after the relentless battle with the zombies, hungered for something as simple as a meal. But as they walked, unaware of the danger still lurking, they failed to realize that a few zombies had survived the crash. The deadly outbreak wasn't over, and if these survivors reached the town, the virus could spread again, this time with devastating consequences for humanity. The film ends on a haunting note, leaving their fate uncertain as the threat of the zombie virus looms on the horizon. So, the moral of the story is, if you're ever on a plane during a zombie outbreak, don't worry about the food or entertainment. Just make sure you have a golf club and good aim.